Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. We would like to begin by asking you to introduce yourself and tell us about your military experience and where you're from.
Actually, right now, I live in Piscataway, New Jersey. I'm originally from Greenville, Mississippi. It's a long way from here. I had a deferment for the first year when I got out of high school because I had like a one-year scholarship at Jackson State University. So I went there in '69. And from there, I couldn't afford to go back to school the second year, and so I traveled around, and I ended up in Florida, and that's where my mother got in touch with me that they were looking for me. I said, looking for me? I said, yeah, because my deferment was no good anymore. Because as you know, back then.
Can I just ask you to share what is a deferment?
During that time, back in the 60s and so forth, they had what they called the draft, which I just spoke about. The draft meaning that at 18, every man had to sign up to be in the Army and in the military. And the military would give you your date to come in and join it. But because I was going to school for that year, they gave me what they called a deferment. They said I didn't have to come in as long as I was going to school. So as long as I was at Jackson State. So after that first year at Jackson State, and I traveled, my deferment was no longer in place. And so after they found out where I was, they sent me a draft letter to come down to Coral Gables, Florida, which is outside of Miami. And so I actually volunteered to go in from there, hopefully to be a accounting specialist. Of course, I ended up being in infantry. So I went from Coral Gables, Florida, to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, which I had my basic training. From there, I went to Fort Polk, Louisiana, preparing me for Vietnam. But I was able to do very well in certain areas, and I was able to go to the honor guard, but actually I never really made it into the honor guard, but I ended up going to Fort McNair in D.C., which was a garrison company. And so I stayed there for about a year, and then they shipped me gave me my orders to go to Vietnam. And so I went to Fort Lewis in Washington, state of Washington, and from there we caught the Flying Tigers over to Vietnam.
Can I ask,
Cam
before getting to Vietnam, what did you know about what Vietnam was or where you were going?
I didn't know that much about Vietnam. All I knew was that, from my perspective and what I knew about the news and what it was North Vietnam and South Vietnam, and that the South Vietnam was supposed to be, we wanted them to be democratic, have a democratic government, and in North Vietnam wanted to be communist. That's the way it was explained to me, and etc. And my perception of it. And I must admit that I was not as astute about life's, government per se as things were, as I could have been or should have been. Even today I say I wish I had paid more attention to history back then, and but I was more like a mathematical science type person who I put most of my energy in. But anyhow, I didn't really feel I was willing to do what I needed to do for my country by being in the military. But I wasn't sure exactly the politics of the situation of the nation. But anyway, I made it to Cameron Bay, and it was the strangest thing to me because I'm over here in a foreign land, and I'm walking down the streets and I see Vietnamese walking down the streets. Hey, GI, number 10, of course it's a compound. And then it was uneasy because I kept hearing explosions all over the place, and I'm looking around and people are pretending like nothing's happening. I said, don't y'all hear that? They said, don't worry, you'll get accustomed to it. So.
A hero comes in many forms, I learned along the way.
Welcome back to Roosevelt. We thank you for coming back to us today and sharing a little bit about yourself. Can you begin by introducing yourself and telling us where you're from here in New Jersey and a little bit of your experience?
My name is Walter Kasmerick. I served in the United States Marine Corps. Once a Marine, always a Marine. I was born in Perth Amboy, and I presently live in Woodbridge, New Jersey. I've never lived more than 4 miles from where I was born, except while I was in the Marine Corps. I served in the United States Marine Corps from 1967 to 1969. I arrived in Vietnam on December 7th, 1967. I was there for the worst year of the war, 1968. I was in Hue City, spelled H-U-E, Hue City, which was the fiercest, nastiest battle of the entire Vietnam War. I took 2 minor wounds and a major wound in Hue. The highlight of Hue City was we captured the North Vietnamese flag flying over the Capitol building. It could be seen from all over the city. A North Vietnamese flag flying on a 70-foot high flagpole. We captured that flag, struck the enemy's colors under fire. They were around the courtyard wall shooting at us, and 3 of us raised the American flag in its place. It made every newspaper in the free world. So it's like the highlight of my life. And because of that, I've been very active in the veteran community. I was the state commander of the Disabled American Veterans, 1993, 94, 95, 96. I was the state commander of the Purple Heart the first time. And 2015, 2016, 2017, I was the state commander of the Purple Heart again. So I'm on the state executive committee for both organizations, and it's, veterans issues have been my life. I help as many veterans as I can. It's very satisfying. I knew growing up it was my responsibility as an American to serve, and I chose the Marine Corps.
So you mentioned several times the Purple Heart.
Yes.
Can you describe to our students what is a Purple Heart?
The Purple Heart is America's oldest award. The first 4 were given out by General George Washington up at Newburgh-on-the-Hudson. It was a cloth badge of merit, and it was revived again in 1932. Douglas MacArthur was instrumental in having it revived. The Purple Heart is for wounds in combat. It's wounds due to enemy action. And I had 2 small wounds in Hue City. Then I had this one, but disabled my right hand and arm.
You also shared that you had a lot of your work is with veteran services.
Yes.
Can you share with us why is Veterans Day important, and how can we, or what can we do to honor our veterans?
Too many people confuse and run together Veterans Day and Memorial Day. Veterans Day is for the living veterans to honor them. Memorial Day is to honor those who gave their lives, and veterans that are deceased. And too often they're blended together, and it loses some of its meaning. I see a level of patriotism in the schools here I don't see other places. And, it's amazing. Most of the children are, just, first generation here or second generation here. And the level of patriotism is way over and above what I see in other school systems. And you should be proud of that here.
So, if you can give our students a message,
I can't hear it.
if you can give our students any message, what would it be?
Well, I always operated as a Marine and afterwards the rest of my life under the PIGS principle. Pride, integrity, guts, and skill. And it's worked for me. You know, there's unmatched pride of being a Marine that you don't have with other services.
Welcome, Mr. D, and thank you for joining us. And thank you for always allowing us to bring veterans to Roosevelt and all of the history that comes with it. But today we would like to highlight you and have you share a little bit about who you are and what you serve.
Thank you, Ms. Ciancia. Okay, my name is, well, most of you kids know me already as Mr. D. My name is Tom Derowitsch. I grew up in the town of New Providence, which is in New Jersey, and I now live in New Brunswick. And after college, I went, 2 years after college, I felt the pressure of the draft. I mean, I believe both Mr. Jarman and Mr. McGee mentioned about the draft. Now, just as a little reminder, the draft back then was if you were a male, but only if you were a male, you could, after you were 18, you could get a letter from the government saying, it started with the word greetings. And then you were ordered to report to an induction center, and you had to serve in the military. Most people who were drafted ended up in the Army. A few ended up in the Navy, Marines, Air Force, or Coast Guard. Or you could volunteer for any one branch of the military. Now, I actually did teach. After I graduated from college, I taught in a Catholic school for 2 years, and then my draft status was changed to 1A, which means I was very, very likely to be drafted. And I was advised by a number of people that if I enlisted, if I voluntarily joined a branch of the military, I could choose what training I could have. So I talked to an Army recruiter, and I joined the Army. I signed up for 3 years of active duty, had basic training at Fort Gordon, Georgia, and that was quite a new experience for me. I heard Mr. Nestor mention Fort Jackson, South Carolina. That's where I spent my first 3 days in the Army, and the new experience for me was all of a sudden I found I'm in a mass of thousands, well, it seemed like thousands to me, but it was probably hundreds, of all young men, ages 18 to 25, and some were older, but mostly 18 to 25-year-olds. And since we had all been issued our uniforms, everybody was dressed alike. And I remember thinking, oh, I've never been in such a mass of people all dressed alike before. After Fort Jackson, South Carolina, I was shipped to Fort Gordon, Georgia, where I had 8 weeks of basic training. Basic training for me in the Army was similar to the Marine. It was, I'll have to admit, it was not quite as tough as the Marines. Mr. Kaczmarek mentioned what basic training in the Marines. The Army was a little different. We had to wake up. Probably the hardest part was having to get up every morning at 4 or 4:30. And then had a standout formation. It was still dark by that time. We'd run around the parade field, do some push-ups, some sit-ups, and then, after all that, then we lined up for breakfast. And by that time, I was really hungry. And I never in my life ate so much for breakfast than I did when I was in basic training. Anyway, so after 8 weeks of basic training, I then went for advanced individual training at Fort Sam Houston, Texas. That's one thing about the military. You do get to travel a lot. And then I was stationed for a while at Fort Rucker, Alabama, which is where they train helicopter pilots. But I wasn't a helicopter pilot. I was stationed at the hospital. And then after 6 months at Fort Rucker, Alabama, I got my orders to go to Vietnam. And I will admit I was scared. Now, when I did go to Vietnam, I was fortunate that I ended up at a big Army base called Bien Hoa. It's pronounced B-I-E-N, and then H-O-A. Many Americans, seeing that name in the print in the newspapers, pronounce it Bien Hoa, but the correct pronunciation is Bien Hoa. I joined the National Guard, but I was already in my 40s by that time. My daughter joined the National Guard when she was a senior in high school, shortly after her 18th birthday, and she went to regular basic training. She went to advanced training at Fort Sam Houston, Texas, same as I did. But then she went to college. She went to Rutgers. She went to Rutgers for 5 years and did not have to pay a dime in tuition. Why was that? Because the New Jersey National Guard covers that. If you're in the New Jersey National Guard, you can get free tuition at any New Jersey state or county college.